Welcome to Build for Bharat, where you and I learn from the builders and makers for Bharat. Today, I have with me Pramod Varma. Pramod and I first worked together on Aadhaar. Pramod, welcome to Build for Bharat.
Pleasure to be here, Sanjay.
Pramod, Aadhaar is the epitome of building for Bharat. When you started to look at the problem statement, how did you think of designing for the scale and diversity of India?
Wow, that's absolutely a wonderful question, because when we came together, we were faced with never been done projects in scale. I mean, India's diversity is so crazy. It was quite frankly overwhelming. Thankfully, we had you as well. So we had good team coming together to think about it. I think specifically with respect to the scale and diversity of India, designing for it, I could maybe think about three areas that we focused. One of the area was the inclusion and the data elements, choice of the product. I'll give you an example. Name. We had significant discussions about whether we will have first name, last name, middle name structure, or we'll have just a name. And you and I was part of that. We did significant analysis of various name structures in India and came to a conclusion in a formal way, because it was a government project, that we need one field called name and not independently deconstructed last name, first name, because we don't have that last name concept like the Western names. Point number one. Second was date of birth or age. When more than 1/3 of the people, even maybe 40-50% of the people, don't really know or don't have a birth certificate or birth exact date, how do you deal with date of birth? And if you insist on date of birth, it becomes an inclusion issue. So we had literally 4 fields in Aadhaar. Each of those 4 fields, we had to discuss about the product design construct, right? Address. How do you construct an Indian address? Behind the temple, under the bridge kind of addresses, where sometimes urban addresses are very different from rural addresses. So we had to unify and create a reasonable structure that accommodates Bharat. I mean, 1 billion people into that address structure. So name, gender, of course, we had probably the first large project in India that did a tri-gender construct. It was inspiring to all of us as well as at that time, right?
I agree, yeah.
Keeping 2 things we did in the design bucket: inclusion, simplicity. Simplicity, of course, helped privacy arguments later also, but from a design perspective, keeping it extremely simple was very key. Keeping it that simple means just 4 fields. Every new field you add, you would have actually created inclusion problem. So we were very cognizant of it and did that. So there's a design bucket where we talked about name, date of birth, field, and how do you design for Bharat, right? That's a design element of it. Then we designed enrollment process. How do people enroll? How do people with smartphone enroll? How do people with no phones enroll? Do they come to a camp? When they do that, how is it going to be efficient? We know the crowd in India happens, right? So these are long questions specific to design, and we did that example. The second bucket was specifically with respect to scale, and the scale was, again, never been done in the world, so it was enormous. And we were targeting ourselves, as you remember, 1 million Aadhaar enrollments every day. So if you don't process that 1 million, next day you have another million coming in. So there was significant question about technology scaling, and that we achieved through very simple, again, keeping the architecture very simple: microservices, independent sub components that can be independently tested for scale, creating microservices to leave each part. So think of you're building a car, and then you're thinking about tires separately, gear separately, seat separately, wheels, steering wheel separately, each of them being so that independently they can be tested for scale. They can also bring together collectively for scale. And most important is that if that piece doesn't scale. We can replace only that piece with a better scalable piece, not the whole system. So it was a very conscious decision to what we call unbundled microservices architecture that allowed us to make sure that the scalability is achieved in units and scalability is achieved in totality. And the third bucket was really about the technology evolutionary scale. So, how does the system evolve to cater to the changing needs? So, how do you design a system that is actually changeable, refactorable, changeable, and evolvable? Was a conscious question we both asked, I remember, because we knew we won't get it right the first time. And we had to design it in such a way that is replaceable, refactorable. So, a lot of architects and designers, I would always urge them to, in fact, that's almost always my starting point when I'm in architecture. First, you unbundle into pieces as a design so that you can deal with units, not the whole system, because it's very overwhelming. Second, you always assume you don't get it right first time. So you design for refactorability. So you remember our internal APIs itself were automated, tested. We first created interface to unknown piece like a biometric submodule. The first thing we did between us is to create interface because I don't know what the implementation is going to be. And I know very high chance that implementation may be even wrong. So how do you refactor that implementation as long as the interface remained correct, right? So I think we applied the scale and diversity thinking very early days in the design. But implementation, we knew we won't get it right.
Correct.
So, but the good thing is that because design accommodated refactorability, the design accommodated scale, design accommodated evolvability, we were able to continuously refactor, correct ourselves, and get to 1 million a day and eventually 1 billion in 6 years.
Thanks, Pramod. And I think what I heard, just to try and summarize it for folks in 30 seconds, is that the first thing that we looked at in Aadhaar was how do we simplify it for the user? And if it's simplified for the user, then it becomes simple for us. So we went in and looked at things across the country where they were so diverse that we felt that things like name wouldn't have internal structures, name and address. And then, on the back end, we looked at how we would break it up into these microservices so that we could compose the entire thing again. And so that when things change as we expected them to, then we would be able to adapt very quickly to those changes so that the entire system could then scale up very quickly to meet the needs. At 1 million enrollments coming in a day, we really had very little room for error, and yet this is what we had to deal with. And so I'm hoping that our listeners find this valuable, and we will hope to have you again, Pramod, for more discussions on this and other topics on Build for Bharat. Thank you for being here.
Very well summarized. Thank you, Sanjay. Looking forward to hearing every other podcast series from your side as well.
Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss an episode. Do you have a question you would like answered? Or is there a guest you would like featured? Do write to us. We are on Twitter at Bharat_Fund or on LinkedIn at Bharat Innovation Fund. Learn more about us at bharat.fund.